Picture the scene as the last light of a brutal day fades over a Scandinavian battlefield. The air is thick with the iron scent of blood and the low groans of the fallen. Ravens, dark as shadow, circle silently overhead, their calls the only sound breaking the heavy silence. In the midst of this carnage, a lone warrior, bleeding from a dozen wounds, struggles to take his final breath. His eyes, clouded with pain, look to the darkening sky not in search of hope, but of something else entirely. He is waiting. He is listening for a sound that would strike both terror and awe into the heart of any fighter. The distant thunder of hooves not from any earthly steed, but from the skies themselves. He is waiting for the Valkyries, but who were these mysterious, powerful women who decided the fates of warriors and served the gods themselves? They are figures wrapped in the mists of myth, often misunderstood as simple shield maidens or romanticized as angels of death. The truth, as we find woven through the ancient poems and sagas, is far more fascinating and complex. Think of them less as grim reapers and more as the ultimate supernatural talent scouts for the great hall of Valhalla. Their mission was not merely to escort the dead, but to search the chaos of every conflict for the bravest, the most honorable, the most extraordinary souls worthy of dining with the gods. They were the choosers of the slain, the arbiters of eternal glory, and their story is one of the most compelling in all of Norse mythology. This journey we're about to take is more than just a list of names and attributes. It is an exploration into the very heart of the Viking worldview, a look at how they understood honor, fate, and the promise of what lay beyond a heroic death. We will uncover the startling origins of the Valkyries, trace their evolution from fearsome spirits of carnage to the more familiar figures of legend, and even meet some of the most famous among them, each with her own unique story and purpose. We'll discover that their role extended far beyond the battlefield, touching on magic, prophecy, and the intimate workings of the gods' own plans. So let's leave the noise of the modern world behind and step onto that timeless, blood-stained field to look to the skies and understand the formidable, awe-inspiring figures of the Valkyries. To truly grasp the essence of these figures, we must start with their name, a key that unlocks their entire purpose. The word Valkyrie comes directly from the Old Norse valkyrja, a compound of two powerful terms. The first part, valor, refers specifically to the slain who litter the battlefield, the dead left in the wake of combat. The second part, kjosa, means to choose. So a Valkyrie is, in the most literal and profound sense, a chooser of the slain. This is not a passive title, it describes an active, decisive power. They weren't just collecting souls randomly, they were discerning critics of courage, scanning the chaos of war to identify and select the most heroic warriors, the ones whose deaths were so exceptional that they earned a place in Odin's hall. This act of choosing was the very core of their being, setting them apart from every other creature in the mythos. It is crucial to understand that these choosers were not human. They were divine, supernatural beings, often described as the daughters of gods, though their specific parentage varies in different stories. They existed in a realm between the mortal and the divine, serving as a direct link between the world of humans and the realm of the gods, Asgard. While they are frequently depicted as armed and armored, resembling the ideal of a shield maiden, their nature was far more mystical. They possessed abilities far beyond any mortal fighter, including the power of flight, shape-shifting into swan form, and an intimate connection with the magical fabric of fate itself. They were spirits of battle, ethereal and formidable, and their power to choose was never exercised on a whim. It was an extension of a higher will. The Valkyries were, first and foremost, the agents of Odin, the All-Father. He was the master strategist of the gods, preparing for the cataclysmic battle of Ragnarök, and he needed the greatest army ever assembled. The Valkyries were his recruiters, his elite officers on the spiritual battlefield. They carried out his precise instructions, selecting those warriors whose bravery and skill would make them valuable assets in the final cosmic war. In this way, they were the instruments of Odin's grand design, the means by which his will was made manifest on every field of human conflict. They did not decide the outcome of battles. That was the domain of the Norns and fate. But they had the supreme authority to decide the ultimate fate of the individual warrior within that battle, granting them an honor that would resonate for eternity. So, with their name and nature established, what exactly did these divine choosers do? Their primary mission was a spectacle of both terror and splendor, playing out high above the fiercest battles. Imagine the sound first, a rushing wind that was not a storm, accompanied by the unearthly, melodic clash of armor and the thunder of hooves that beat not upon the earth but upon the very clouds. The Valkyries rode steeds of ethereal light or mist, creatures that could gallop across the sky, their manes flickering like the aurora borealis. From this vantage point, they were the ultimate spectators to the theater of war, their divine sight piercing through the dust, the chaos, and the raw emotion to see what truly mattered, the character of each individual fighter. This was not a random harvest. The selection process was an act of profound discernment. A Valkyrie's gaze was not drawn to the warrior who simply killed the most, but to the one who fought with unwavering courage, who stood their ground when all hope was lost, who protected their comrades, and who faced their fate with honor. They could see the invisible threads of a warrior's destiny, recognizing the precise moment when a life of bravery was meant to culminate in a death worthy of legend. It was at that exact, predetermined instant that they would descend. While the image of a Valkyrie swooping down to carry a soul away is powerful, the process was often more subtle. Sometimes it was a touch, a whisper, or simply their presence that gently guided the warrior's spirit from his broken body. The most common Old Norse phrase for death in battle was actually to turn one's eyes to the Valkyries, a beautiful and poignant way of saying a warrior accepted his fate and saw his celestial escorts awaiting him. The significance of this selection cannot be overstated. The chosen warrior, his spirit now freed, was not headed for a vague afterlife. He became part of an elite corps known as the Einherjar, which translates to those who fight alone or the single champions. This name hints at their new, exalted purpose. These were the greatest of the great, gathered from all eras and all tribes, brought together for a single cosmic goal. Their new home was Valhalla, Odin's immense hall within Asgard, a place of unimaginable grandeur with walls made of spears and a roof made of shields. But Valhalla was far from a passive paradise of eternal rest. It was a training ground, the ultimate military academy. Each day, the Einherjar would don their armor and march into the vast fields outside the hall to engage in furious, glorious combat against one another. They would fight with relentless passion, honing their skills to perfection, and each evening a magical restoration would occur. All wounds would be healed, and any warrior who had died in the day's training would be resurrected, whole once more. Then they would all return to the hall for a magnificent feast, dining on the meat of the magical boar Sihrimnir, which was resurrected every night to be eaten again, and drinking mead from the udders of the goat Heidrun. This cycle of daily battle and nightly feasting was not for mere entertainment. It was all preparation for Ragnarök, the prophesied twilight of the gods. Odin, in his wisdom, knew this final battle was inevitable. He was building an army of the most formidable warriors who had ever lived, training them for eons to stand alongside the gods when the forces of chaos were unleashed upon the world. The Valkyries, therefore, were not just recruiters for a heavenly reward. They were the crucial logistical force behind the divine defense of the cosmos. Every soul they selected was another soldier for the ultimate struggle between order and destruction, making their choices on the battlefield a matter of universal consequence. Yet this formidable duty on the battlefield reveals only one facet of their complex nature. Once their celestial selection was complete and the spirits of the chosen Einherjar were guided along the Bifrost bridge to Asgard, the Valkyries underwent a remarkable transformation. They shed their blood-stained armor and terrifying aspect, trading the cacophony of war for the majestic silence of Odin's hall. In Valhalla, they were no longer the choosers of the slain, but became the gracious hostesses of the gods, embodying a serene and nurturing presence that stands in stark contrast to their warlike role. This shift is profound. Imagine the scene within the great hall, the immense rafters towering overhead, the light glinting off countless shields, the air filled with the boisterous camaraderie of history's greatest heroes. And moving among them are the Valkyries, no longer mounted on ethereal steeds but gliding gracefully between the long tables. Their primary duty now was to serve. They carried drinking horns overflowing with the finest mead, not from any ordinary brew, but from the udders of the supernatural goat Heidrun, who fed on the leaves of the world tree Yggdrasil. They presented platters heaped with the meat of the boar Sihrimnir, a creature that magically regenerated each night to feed the endless host. In this capacity, they were known as Valkyria or Ale Valkyries, a title that highlights their intimate connection to the sacred feast. This dual nature is not a contradiction but a completion of their character. It reflects a deep understanding of the Viking ideal, a perfect balance between the ferocity required for survival and the hospitality that defined a noble society. The Valkyries were the ultimate expression of this balance. On the battlefield, they represented the harsh, uncompromising reality of fate and honor. In the hall, they represented the reward for that honor, community, celebration, and the comfort of a place earned through courage. They were the bridge between the brutal struggle of mortal life and the eternal glory that followed, ensuring the warriors felt not only honored but also welcomed and cared for in their divine home. This service was far from menial. It was a sacred act. By personally serving the mead and food, the Valkyries were facilitating the sacred cycle that prepared the Einherjar for Ragnarök. The feast was as crucial as the daily battle, a time for bonding, storytelling, and drawing strength from the fellowship of heroes. The Valkyries, in their role as hostesses, fostered this environment. They were constant reminders to the Einherjar of the glory they had earned and the cosmic importance of their continued preparation. Their presence sanctified the feast, turning a meal into a ritual that sustained the very army of the gods. This complete picture, the fierce selector on the field and the gracious server in the hall, shows us that the Valkyries were not merely instruments of death, but integral figures in the entire ecosystem of honor, reward, and destiny that defined the Norse afterlife. While their collective role as choosers and servers paints a powerful picture, the Valkyries were far from a faceless legion. The skalds, the poets of the Viking Age, gave them individuality, bestowing upon them names that echoed their nature, and in some of the most compelling sagas, crafting for them stories as rich and dramatic as any human hero's tale. These names were not merely labels, they were declarations of essence. We encounter figures like Hilda, whose name means battle, a being who could be seen as the very spirit of conflict personified. There is Trutha, meaning strength, the namesake daughter of Thor himself, blurring the lines between god and Valkyrie. Others, like Skirgul, Shaker, or Lurk, noise or battle, evoke the cacophony and upheaval of the battlefield they presided over. These names tell us that each Valkyrie embodied a specific aspect of war's terrible tapestry. Yet one figure rises above all others in the annals of myth, a Valkyrie whose story is so profound it has resonated for centuries, inspiring operas and epic poetry. Her name is Brynhilda, sometimes rendered as Brynhild, and her saga is one of the most intricate and heartbreaking in all of Norse literature, primarily found within the epic Völsunga saga. Brynhilda was no minor spirit. She was a Valkyrie of the highest order, a shieldmaiden of Odin, entrusted with the grave responsibility of swaying the outcomes of human conflicts according to the All-Father's design. Her story, however, is a powerful reminder that even these divine agents were subject to the whims of fate and the consequences of their own hearts. The core of Brynhilda's tragedy begins with an act of compassion, or perhaps defiance, that went against Odin's explicit command. In one version of the tale, she was tasked with deciding a battle between two kings. Odin had decreed that one should be victorious, but Brynhilda, seeing the justice or the greater merit in the other king's cause, used her power to grant him the victory instead. This act of disobedience, of prioritizing her own judgment over the absolute will of her master, could not go unpunished. In a fury, Odin struck a terrible sentence upon her. She was stripped of her divine status, her immortality severed. He cast a sleep thorn into her, plunging her into an enchanted slumber, and then he surrounded her with a barrier of flickering flame, a wall of fire that only the most fearless of heroes could ever hope to cross. Brynhilda the Chooser was now Brynhilda the Prize, her own fate suspended until a man without a trace of fear could wake her. This punishment redefined her entirely, transforming an active, powerful agent of the gods into a passive figure waiting for her own destiny to be decided by another, a cruel inversion of her original role. This setup leads directly into one of the great cycles of Norse legend, intertwining the fates of heroes, dragons, and cursed treasure. The hero who eventually braved the flames was the legendary Sigurd, the slayer of the dragon Fafnir. Finding the magnificent warrior woman asleep within her ring of fire, he awakened her, and the two, recognizing kindred spirits of immense courage and honor, fell deeply in love. They swore binding oaths to one another, promises that should have sealed their fate together. But the path of fate is rarely straight, and it is here that the story takes its most devastating turn, a twist involving magic, deception, and a betrayal that would seal the doom of not just Brynhilda and Sigurd, but of entire royal lineages. This part of the tale, however, is a saga in itself, a complex web we will unravel in detail when we explore the epic of Sigurd and the Völsungs later on. For now, it is enough to understand that Brynhilda's story elevates the Valkyries from archetypes into deeply tragic characters. She demonstrates that they possessed not just power, but also will, emotion, and the capacity for love, making their interactions with gods and mortals profoundly consequential. Now, let us bring these formidable figures into sharper focus by envisioning their appearance, a sight that was designed to inspire both reverence and dread. The classical image of the Valkyrie, as solidified in the poetic Eddas and later romanticized in art, is one of a warrior woman of unparalleled majesty. She is almost always depicted clad in a full suit of gleaming, often silver, chainmail or armor, a shining helmet upon her head, sometimes adorned with wings or other majestic features. In her hands she carries the tools of her trade, a deadly spear, the favored weapon of her master Odin, and a sturdy, often ornate shield. This martial presentation was not merely for show, it grounded them in the reality of the world they oversaw, reflecting the very essence of the warriors they selected. They were not delicate spirits but formidable combatants themselves, their attire a testament to the serious life and death nature of their duties. Yet, what truly set them apart from any earthly warrior was the otherworldly light that seemed to emanate from them. This was not the dull gleam of polished metal under a sunlit sky, but something far more mystical. The Norse poets spoke of a phenomenon they called alphablot, often translated as elf light or more poetically as the light of the Valkyries. This was a shimmering, ethereal radiance that flickered and danced around them, described in the sagas as being like the aurora borealis made manifest on a single being. It was said that this light came from their armor and weapons themselves, as if the divine metal was infused with the raw power of the cosmos. When a Valkyrie rode, she didn't just move through the air, she was a moving constellation, a beacon of supernatural power cutting through the darkness of the battlefield below. This light was their most famous and fearsome attribute, a visible sign of their otherworldly nature that could be seen from great distances, a celestial signal that the business of the gods was at hand. Imagine being a warrior on that field, amid the grime, the blood, and the chaos. To look up and see that unearthly glow descending from the clouds would be a moment of profound clarity. It was an omen that transcended simple victory or defeat. For the soldier fighting with desperate courage, it might represent the ultimate validation of his life's purpose, a divine acknowledgement of his valor. For another, it could signal imminent, inescapable death. This radiant appearance was therefore inseparable from their function. The light was both a guide for the worthy and a warning of the inexorable approach of fate. It cemented their role as beings who operated on a plane far beyond human understanding, whose very presence blurred the line between the mortal world and the divine realm of Asgard. Their form was a perfect synthesis of the tangible and the mystical, the solid, recognizable armor of a fighter combined with the ethereal, awe-inspiring light of a goddess. These divine riders could not be carried by any ordinary earthly steed. The magnificent creatures that bore the Valkyries across the sky were as supernatural as their riders, beings woven from the very fabric of the elements. While later art often depicts them on noble horses, the oldest sources paint a far more mystical picture. Their mounts were creatures of air and mist, their hooves beating not upon solid ground but upon the vault of the heavens themselves. Think of a steed whose body is formed from the swirling gray of a storm cloud, its mane a trail of vapor that flickers with the same unearthly light that shines from its rider's armor. These were not animals but manifestations of power, capable of galloping on the wind and passing through solid matter as if it were smoke. This ethereal nature perfectly complemented the Valkyries' role as beings who existed between worlds, able to observe the mortal realm without being fully part of it, their passage marked only by a strange rushing wind and a shimmer in the air above the fighting. This concept is powerfully reinforced by a unique and grisly feature of Old Norse poetry, the kenning. A kenning is a two-part metaphorical phrase used in place of a simple noun, a kind of poetic riddle that enriched the language. For example, the sea might be called the whale road and a warrior the feeder of ravens. When it came to the Valkyries, the Skalds created some of their most striking kennings, particularly for their mounts. While they did ride their cloud steeds, the poets also described them as riding the creatures that were the true inhabitants of the battlefield after the fighting was done. Ravens and wolves, the scavengers who feasted on the slain, were metaphorically referred to as the horses of the Valkyries. This is a chillingly brilliant connection. Imagine a bard reciting a poem about a recent battle, singing of how the Valkyries rode their horses of blood mist over the field. The audience would understand the dual meaning instantly. It meant that the Valkyries had been present, that their divine selection had taken place, and that the carrion beasts now gathering were the direct consequence of their work. The wolves and ravens were the cleanup crew following the celestial recruiters, a stark and visceral reminder that the glory of Valhalla was purchased with the brutal reality of death. This kenning ties the Valkyries inextricably to the entire life cycle of the battlefield. They arrive with the conflict, make their choices, and their departure signals the beginning of the feast for the earthly creatures that serve them. It grounds their cosmic purpose in the physical evidence left behind, making their presence feel terrifyingly real. But the power of the Valkyries extended far beyond their visible presence on the battlefield or their graceful service in the hall. To truly comprehend the weight of their choice, we must understand the source of their authority, a force that permeated the Norse worldview, the intricate and potent magic known as Seda. This was not mere trickery or illusion. Seda was a profound form of sorcery deeply intertwined with the fabric of fate itself, dealing with prophecy, destiny, and the ability to shape the threads of reality. And the Valkyries were among its most formidable practitioners. Their legendary ability to choose who lived and who died was not a simple matter of picking favorites. It was a direct, active application of this magical art, a sacred and terrifying form of fate weaving on the field of human conflict. Seda was a complex and often ambiguous power. It was primarily associated with foresight and the manipulation of fortune, allowing its user to see the possible paths of the future and to nudge events toward a desired outcome. Practitioners, known as Seda workers or volvers, were often women who held positions of great respect and fear within their communities. They would enter trance-like states, their souls journeying to other realms to gather knowledge, and they could cast spells to bless crops, heal the sick, or curse enemies. Most importantly, they could interpret and to some extent influence the web of fate woven by the Norns, the three cosmic beings who spun the destinies of both gods and mortals at the base of the world tree Yggdrasil. This connection to fate is the crucial link to the Valkyries. While the Norns spun the grand, overarching tapestry of destiny, the Valkyries were the master embroiderers working on the immediate, visceral details of that design. They were the active agents who ensured that the threads of a warrior's life were cut at the precise moment his fate, as decreed by the Norns and overseen by Odin, demanded it. Think of it this way: the Norns might determine that a great hero would fall in a specific battle. That is the broad, predetermined outcome, but the Valkyrie, using her mastery of Seda, is the one who navigates the chaos of that battle. She perceives the intricate web of cause and effect, the flight of every arrow, the swing of every axe, and she ensures that the hero meets his end not by a random blow, but in a manner that fulfills his destiny and maximizes his honor. This is where the concept of weaving becomes so powerfully literal. Old Norse poetry is filled with imagery of the Valkyries as weavers, but their loom is the battlefield and their threads are human lives. In the epic poem The Darathaljoth, a haunting scene describes Valkyries not riding but sitting before a gruesome loom. The warp and weft are made of human intestines, the weights are severed heads, the shuttles are swords and arrows, and the cloth they weave is the bloody outcome of the battle itself. As they chant their terrible song, they decide the fates of kings and commoners alike, their weaving directly dictating who will triumph and who will fall. This is Seda in its most raw and powerful form, the active, conscious shaping of destiny in real time. This magical authority positioned the Valkyries in a unique relationship with the Norns. They were not rivals but collaborators in the execution of cosmic order. The Norns established the grand narrative, the unchangeable timeline of events leading to Ragnarök. The Valkyries, as Odin's chief operatives, were tasked with implementing the critical chapters of that narrative, specifically the assembly of the Einherjar. Their Seda was the tool that allowed them to peer into a warrior's soul, to assess his courage and worth, and to recognize the exact moment his thread was meant to be cut and transferred to the grand tapestry of Valhalla. Their magic gave them the sight to see beyond the physical struggle, to perceive the spiritual currency of honor that Odin valued above all else. This makes them far more than battlefield reapers. They are divine auditors of valor, using supernatural means to quantify and collect the souls that would tip the scales in the final war. Their power was so integral that without their Seda-guided choices, Odin's entire strategy for Ragnarök would have been left to chance, an unthinkable notion for the god who relentlessly sought knowledge and control over his fate. However, the image of the Valkyrie as a graceful bestower of honor and a serene hostess is only one side of the coin. To see them solely in this light is to miss a more primal and terrifying aspect of their nature, a side that is far older and rooted in a raw, unfiltered connection to the chaos of war itself. While they served as guides to a glorious afterlife, their presence on the battlefield was not always a promise of reward. For many, it was an omen of indiscriminate slaughter, a signal that the battle would be decided not by skill alone, but by a descent into uncontrollable, frenzied violence. This is the darker, more fearsome side of the Valkyries, a reality embodied by figures whose very names evoke terror and upheaval. Consider the names of some of the most prominent Valkyries as recorded in the ancient poems. We have Skurgl, whose name translates directly to shaker. This isn't a gentle vibration, It implies one who makes the very earth tremble, who shakes the foundations of armies and causes formations to crumble into disarray. Then there is Gurndul, the wand wielder. While a wand might sound delicate to modern ears, in the context of Norse magic, this was a staff of immense power, an instrument for casting spells of conflict and confusion. Another, Hlurk, means noise or battle, a personification of the overwhelming cacophony of clashing steel and war cries that define the battlefield. These names paint a picture not of benevolent choosers, but of active, violent instigators. They were not merely observers, they were catalysts. This darker role is vividly illustrated in one of their most potent and frightening abilities, the power to incite the berserker rage in warriors. The berserkers were legendary fighters who entered a trance-like state of fury known as berserker gang. In this state, they would howl like animals, gnaw on the rims of their shields, and feel no pain, fighting with a superhuman strength and a terrifying disregard for their own safety. Historical accounts suggest this was a psychological state, perhaps induced by rituals, drugs, or sheer fanaticism. But in the mythic view, this uncontrollable fury had a supernatural source. It was the Valkyries, particularly those like Skurgul and Gurndul, who could reach into the mind of a warrior and unleash this primal madness. With a whisper on the wind or a glance from their shining eyes, they could erase reason and replace it with pure, destructive instinct. They could turn a disciplined soldier into a whirlwind of violence, a weapon that would tear through friend and foe alike, ensuring the battle reached a fever pitch of bloodshed. This served Odin's purposes perfectly, but in a much more brutal and utilitarian way than simply selecting the brave. The All-Father needed souls for his army, yes, but he needed them in vast numbers. A clean, decisive battle with few casualties was of little use to him. What he required were massive, bloody conflicts that would yield a great harvest of the slain. The darker Valkyries were his instruments for ensuring this outcome. They would weave spells of discord, causing alliances to fracture and misunderstandings to flare into violence. They could cloud the judgment of commanders, leading to reckless charges or the refusal of prudent retreats. Their goal was to maximize the carnage, to make certain that the field was left strewn with the dead so that the choosers had a plentiful supply of candidates from which to select the very best. In this sense, the Valkyrie Corps had a division of labor. Some were the sowers who ensured a rich harvest, while others were the reapers who gathered the finest crops. This duality is essential to understanding the Norse conception of these beings. They were not purely good or evil. They were necessary forces within a cosmos that accepted conflict and death as fundamental truths. The glory of Valhalla was built upon a foundation of brutal, often senseless-seeming violence. The Valkyrie who drove a man to berserker fury, causing him to die in a reckless charge, and the Valkyrie who then selected his spirit for the Einherjar because of the courage he showed in that final moment, were two sides of the same divine power. They represented the complete cycle of war, its terrible cost and its transcendent reward. To fear them was as rational as to revere them, for their favor was as unpredictable and as deadly as the battlefield itself. This terrifying aspect of the Valkyries finds its most chilling and explicit depiction not in a general myth, but in a specific, haunting poem preserved within the pages of a great Icelandic saga. Tucked into the narrative of Njol's saga, a sprawling tale of blood feuds and honor, is a short, powerful piece known as Daradaljoth, the Song of the Darts. This poem presents a vision of the Valkyries so visceral and macabre that it completely redefines our understanding of their power, moving them from divine recruiters to the actual weavers of human destiny on a literal, grisly loom. The scene is set not on a misty battlefield, but in a quiet, ordinary location in Caithness, Scotland, on the eve of the historic Battle of Clontarf in the year 1014. A man named Durath witnesses something no mortal should ever see. He comes upon a building and, peering inside, finds 12 mysterious, imposing figures. These are not armed riders but women seated around a loom. Yet this is no ordinary weaving room. The materials they use are the stuff of nightmare. The poem describes with stark, unflinching detail how the warp and weft of their tapestry are made from human intestines. The weights that keep the loom taut are severed human heads. Their shuttles are not wood but blood-stained swords and arrows, and as they work, they do not weave a simple cloth. They chant a terrible prophetic song, their voices rising and falling as their hands move with supernatural speed. The song they sing leaves no doubt about what is happening. Each motion of their loom directly corresponds to the events unfolding miles away on the field at Clontarf. As they throw the shuttle back and forth, they are determining the flight of spears and the swing of axes. When they beat the newly woven threads tightly together, they are causing the shield walls to clash and men to fall. Their chanting is a spell, a direct incantation of the battle's outcome. They sing lines like, "We weave a web of victory for a young king," and "Where friends are fighting fiercely, we let life's blood flow." They are not predicting the future, they are actively creating it with every pull of the intestinal thread, every weight of a skull. The battlefield is not a place where fate is revealed, but where the tapestry they are weaving is brought to life in real time. This image of the loom is a profound metaphor made terrifyingly real. It perfectly encapsulates the Norse concept of fate, or orlurg, as a woven fabric. The Norns at the base of Yggdrasil spin the threads of individual lives, but here, the Valkyries are taking those raw materials and working them into the immediate, bloody pattern of a specific conflict. They are the executors of the grand design, the artisans of death. The poem emphasizes that their work is not random. It is a deliberate act of creation with a clear purpose. They are weaving the victory of one side and the destruction of the other, choosing who will be a hero and who will be a forgotten casualty. This removes any lingering romanticism from their role. They are not merely selecting the brave from the aftermath. They are engineering the very conditions that create the slain from which to choose. What makes the Daradaljoth so powerful is its conclusion. After completing their grim work, the 12 figures do not simply vanish. Instead, they do something unexpected and deeply symbolic. They tear the finished tapestry from the loom and rip it into pieces. Each woman takes a portion of the bloody, intestine-woven cloth. Then 6 of them ride away to the north and 6 ride away to the south. This act is the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. The tearing of the web signifies the end of the battle, the point at which the outcome is decided and the fighting ceases. But their division and departure in opposite directions represent the dispersal of the slain. The Valkyries are now splitting up to fulfill their more familiar role, some heading off to gather the chosen souls for Odin's hall, while others leave the dead for the ravens and wolves of the earthly field. The poem presents the entire cycle, from the orchestration of the violence to the disposal of the dead, as a single, continuous supernatural operation. This one eerie poem consolidates every facet of the Valkyries' power. It shows their connection to Seda magic, their role as shapers of fate, their service to Odin's wider goals, and their terrifying, impartial nature. They are not judges of morality in a human sense. They are technicians of destiny, working with the brutal materials at hand to create a pattern that serves the cosmic needs of the gods. The Daradaljoth is perhaps the most authentic and unfiltered window we have into how the Norse themselves perceived these formidable beings, not as romantic heroines, but as elemental forces, as inevitable, creative, and destructive as the threads of fate they wove. The story of Brynhildr, however, moves far beyond a simple tale of divine punishment, unfolding into a complex human drama of love, betrayal, and shattered oaths that would echo through the ages. After Odin's wrath condemned her to an enchanted sleep within that impassable ring of fire, Brynhildr's fate became a prize, a test for any hero brave enough to claim her. The man who finally succeeded was the greatest hero of the North, Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. Having already achieved legendary status by killing the monstrous worm Fafnir and acquiring a cursed hoard of treasure, Sigurd learned of the shield maiden trapped atop a mountain surrounded by flames. Undaunted, he rode his mighty horse Granny straight through the fiery wall, a feat that proved his fearlessness. Inside the circle, he found not a helpless princess, but a magnificent warrior woman in full armor. He gently removed her helmet, cut open her chainmail corselet with his sword, and as she awoke, the two beheld one another. In that moment, two kindred spirits of unparalleled courage and honor recognized their equal. They fell deeply, irrevocably in love. Their union was sealed with the most solemn vows. They swore oaths to each other, promises that in the Norse world were considered unbreakable, binding their destinies together. Sigurd gave Brynhilde the ultimate token of his love and trust, a ring from the dragon Fafnir's treasure, a gold band named Anvaranot. But this was no ordinary piece of jewelry. It carried a terrible curse laid upon it by the dwarf Andvari, a curse that would bring doom to all its subsequent owners. With this exchange, their futures were intertwined, and Sigurd departed, promising to return to make her his wife. Yet the path of fate is seldom straight, and this is where the story turns from a heroic romance into an irreversible tragedy. Sigurd's journey led him to the court of the Burgundian king Giugiuki. There he became a sworn brother to the king's sons Gunnar and Hogni. The queen, a powerful sorceress named Grimhild, recognized Sigurd's greatness and desired to bind him to her own family. She saw an opportunity to break his bond with Brynhilde and secure him for her daughter, the beautiful Gudrun. Grimhild prepared a powerful magic potion, a draught of forgetfulness. When Sigurd drank it, his memory of Brynhilde and the vows they shared was erased, clouded by a magical fog. In this state, he willingly married Gudrun. The tragedy deepens when Gunnar, Sigurd's new brother-in-law, decides he wishes to win the famous Brynhilde for himself. Hearing of the Valkyrie on the fire-encircled mountain, he sets out with Sigurd and Hogni. But when Gunnar attempts to ride through the flames, his horse balks, refusing to enter the inferno. He cannot pass the test. Desperate to help his sworn brother and seeing no other way, Sigurd, his memory still clouded by Grimhild's magic, proposes a solution rooted in the shape-shifting arts of the Norse sagas. The two men use their magical powers to exchange appearances. Sigurd takes on the form of Gunnar, and with his own innate courage and strength, he rides through the flames once more. Brynhilde is astonished and horrified to see the man who looks like Gunnar, a stranger, succeed where only her true love Sigurd had before. She is bound by the terms of her curse. She must marry the man who braves the fire. But in a cruel twist, Sigurd, still in Gunnar's form, spends 3 nights with her in her hall. As a symbol of his faithfulness to his blood brother, he places his own great sword, Gram, between them in the bed as a barrier. He then takes the ring Anvaranot from her finger, giving her another from the hoard in its place, and returns to his companions, switching back to his own form. Brynhilde, believing she has been won by Gunnar, accompanies them back to the court of the Burgundians, her heart filled with confusion and a growing sense of betrayal, completely unaware of the devastating deception that has been played upon her. The final, explosive confrontation was inevitable. Some time later, while bathing in a river, Brynhilde and Gudrun began to quarrel, as sisters-in-law often do, each boasting of their husband's achievements. The argument escalated until Gudrun, in a moment of vicious triumph, revealed the terrible truth. She showed Brynhilde the ring Anvaranot which Sigurd had given to her, and declared that it was Sigurd, not Gunnar, who had ridden through the flames a second time. The veil of deception was ripped away. Brynhilde saw the full, horrifying picture. She had been tricked into marrying a man she did not love. Her own vows to Sigurd had been broken by him, and the man she loved had betrayed her, married another, and facilitated her own humiliation. This revelation shattered Brynhilde. The love she felt for Sigurd curdled into an all-consuming rage born from a profound sense of dishonor. In the Norse ethos, an oath was the foundation of social order, and its breaking was the gravest of crimes. She felt not only personally betrayed but publicly shamed. Her response was merciless. She confronted Gunnar, demanding vengeance for the deception. She accused him of being a lesser man for needing Sigurd to win her, and she declared that unless Sigurd was killed, she would leave him, destroying his honor. Torn between his love for his wife and his oath of brotherhood to Sigurd, Gunnar and his brother Hogni succumbed to her demands. They orchestrated the murder of their sworn brother, enlisting their younger sibling Guttorm, who had not sworn any oaths to Sigurd, to do the deed. While Sigurd slept, Guttorm stabbed him to death, but Brynhilda's vengeance provided no solace. As Sigurd lay dying, he called out to Brynhilda, and in that moment her fury broke, replaced by an ocean of grief and the stark realization that her demand for honor had destroyed the only thing that gave her life meaning. Her laughter at the deed turned to wailing. She declared her love for Sigurd and her intention to follow him in death. She then gave a long, prophetic speech foretelling the grim futures of all involved. The downfall of the Burgundians, Gudrun's sorrows before mounting Sigurd's funeral pyre, taking her own life with a sword so that she could enter the afterlife by his side. In this final, tragic act, Brynhilda reclaimed her agency not as a Valkyrie serving Odin, but as a woman choosing her own fate, uniting with her love in death since they were cruelly kept apart in life. Her saga stands as one of the most powerful in Norse mythology, a story where the actions of gods and the magic of mortals intertwine to create a heartbreaking tragedy of love, honor, and the devastating cost of deception. And so, with a heart full of fury and a soul crushed by dishonor, Brynhilda set in motion the final, tragic act of their story. She confronted her husband, Gunnar, not with tears, but with a cold, unyielding demand for vengeance. In the Norse world, where public reputation was everything, the deception had not only broken her heart but had utterly destroyed her social standing. She had been made to look a fool, tricked into a marriage she never wanted, while the man she loved had seemingly discarded her. She declared to Gunnar that his honor was now inextricably linked to hers. If he did not avenge this great insult by killing Sigurd, she would leave him, an act that would brand him as a coward incapable of defending his wife's honor. Gunnar and his brother Hogni were trapped in an impossible dilemma. On one hand was their sworn blood brotherhood with Sigurd, a sacred bond. On the other was the demands of their wife and sister-in-law and the crushing weight of societal expectation. Ultimately, the pressure to uphold their immediate honor in the eyes of their court proved stronger than their oath to Sigurd. Yet they could not bring themselves to murder their friend directly, as that would incur the blood guilt and the wrath of the gods. Instead, they devised a cruel loophole. They enlisted their younger brother, Guttorm, who, significantly, had not sworn any oath of brotherhood to Sigurd. They manipulated Guttorm, feeding him potions of wolf and snake to stir a bestial ferocity in him, and commanded him to be their instrument. The murder itself was a cowardly act, befitting the tangled web of deception that led to it. Guttorm attacked Sigurd while he lay sleeping, defenseless in his bed. He stabbed the great hero to death, ending the life of the man who had slain a dragon and braved a wall of fire. But the vengeance Brynhilda had so passionately called for brought her no peace. As Sigurd lay dying, some versions of the saga say he managed to hurl his own sword, Gram, after his fleeing murderer, cutting Guttorm in half. But with his final breaths, he called out to Brynhilda, and in that moment her rage shattered, replaced by an overwhelming wave of grief and clarity. The sound of his voice broke the spell of her anger, and she saw the horrific reality of what she had demanded. Her laughter at the success of her plot turned into wailing despair. She realized that in her quest to restore her honor, she had destroyed the only person who had ever truly honored her for who she was. Her subsequent actions cement her legacy as one of mythology's most tragic and formidable figures. She delivered a long, prophetic speech, foretelling the grim fates that would now befall the Burgundians' wars, betrayals, and a fiery end. She cursed the gold that had started it all and mourned the love that was stolen from her. Then she made her final, defiant choice. She would not live in a world without Sigurd. Declaring her enduring love for him, she announced her intention to follow him into death. But she would not go as a passive victim. In a final assertion of her agency, the Valkyrie spirit rising one last time, she took her own life with a sword, ensuring she would enter the afterlife as a warrior worthy of joining her beloved. She was then placed on Sigurd's funeral pyre, their bodies consumed by the same flames that had once united them. In death, they were finally reunited, their tragic saga concluding not with a whimper, but with the roaring fire of a heroic end. The story of Sigurd and Brynhilde is more than a simple romance. It is a profound exploration of the conflict between personal desire and social duty, the destructive power of broken oaths, and the tragic consequences when the wills of gods and the hearts of mortals fatally collide. Yet for all their terrifying power on the battlefield and their serene grace in Valhalla, the Valkyries possessed another, more enigmatic aspect that reveals a surprising layer of vulnerability. Beyond the clatter of arms and the feasts of the gods, these formidable figures were also deeply connected to the natural world through a beautiful and ancient motif, the Swan maiden. This archetype, found in folklore across the globe, paints the Valkyrie not just as a warrior, but as a being who could shed her armor and take on the form of a majestic swan, a transformation that added profound complexity to their nature and their interactions with humanity. The image is strikingly different from the battlefield. Picture a secluded, misty lake nestled deep within an ancient Scandinavian forest. Instead of the thunder of hooves, the air is filled with an ethereal silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore. On the lake, a group of stunningly beautiful white swans glide with otherworldly grace. To any mortal who might stumble upon this scene, they would appear as nothing more than magnificent birds. But a more perceptive observer might notice something unusual, perhaps a faint celestial light shimmering around them, or an intelligence in their eyes that seems far too knowing. For these are no ordinary swans. They are Valkyries who have temporarily laid aside their divine duties and their warlike forms to bathe and rest in the solitude of nature, their swan plumage allowing them a freedom and a peace unavailable to them in their official roles. This ability to shapeshift underscores their fundamental nature as liminal beings, entities that exist in the spaces between worlds, between human and divine, between war and peace, and now between land and sky, between woman and bird. The swan, in many cultures, is a symbol of purity, grace, and transformation, but also of travel between realms, making it a perfect vessel for the Valkyrie's spirit. This connection suggests that their power was not solely martial. It was also deeply tied to the cycles of nature, to magic, and to a more primal, wild form of divinity that predates the structured order of Odin's court. However, this beautiful freedom came with a dangerous catch, a vulnerability that forms the core of the Swan maiden tales. The key to the Valkyrie's transformation was her swan plumage, a feathered cloak or garment that she could wear to become a swan, and without which she was trapped in her human-like form. This created a scenario where a mortal man, by chance or cunning, could gain a staggering power over a divine being. The typical story goes like this. A young man, often a hunter or a farmer, happens upon a group of swan maidens bathing in a remote lake. He watches hidden as they slip out of their swan forms, leaving their feathered garments on the shore. Seizing an opportunity beyond his wildest dreams, the man stealthily creeps forward and steals one of the plumage cloaks. When the maidens finish their bath and prepare to return to the skies, one of them finds her means of flight is gone. She is stranded, unable to rejoin her sisters. The man then reveals himself holding the stolen plumage. In that moment, the balance of power shifts dramatically. The formidable Valkyrie, a being who commands the fates of warriors, is now utterly dependent on a mortal. The man typically offers her a choice: return with him to his home and become his wife, or remain trapped forever in a form that limits her power. Faced with no other option, the Valkyrie agrees to the marriage. These stories often describe a period of years where the couple lives together, and the Valkyrie, despite her circumstances, proves to be an ideal wife, extraordinarily skilled, wise, and bearing the man children. Yet a profound melancholy always hangs over her. She is a captive, a wild spirit domesticated, and her heart yearns for the freedom of the skies and the company of her sisters. The tension in these narratives is palpable. They blur the lines between a romantic encounter and a supernatural kidnapping, forcing us to question the morality of the mortal's actions. Is this a love story or an act of coercion? The tales do not provide easy answers. They reflect a deep-seated human fascination with the divine, and a desire to capture and possess that which is beyond our reach, even if it means stripping it of its essential nature. The inevitable climax of these stories is almost always the same. After many years, often triggered by a child's innocent question or a careless remark from the husband, the Valkyrie discovers the hidden location of her long-lost swan plumage. The moment she lays hands on it, the spell of her captivity is broken. The call of her true nature is irresistible. She immediately dons the feathers, transforms back into a swan, and without a backward glance, or sometimes with a single, sorrowful look at the mortal family she leaves behind, she takes flight, returning to her celestial duties, never to be seen by the man again. This motif adds a crucial layer of pathos to our understanding of the Valkyries. It shows that even these powerful agents of the gods are subject to certain rules of magic and are not immune to the cunning of mortals. Their power, while immense, has its specific channels and its necessary tools. Without her armor and spear, a Valkyrie on the battlefield is incomplete. Without her swan plumage, she is earthbound and vulnerable. This vulnerability makes them more relatable, more complex figures. They are not invincible automatons, but beings with desires, a yearning for freedom, and a deep connection to their own kind. The Swan Maiden tales ultimately serve as a poignant metaphor for the elusive nature of fate and the divine. The Valkyrie represents a moment of transcendent grace and power that can be encountered and even held onto for a time, but can never be permanently possessed by mortals. Just as a warrior chosen for Valhalla is taken from his earthly life, the Valkyrie herself must eventually return to her cosmic purpose. These stories remind us that in the Norse worldview, the boundaries between the human and the divine were permeable, but any crossing was temporary and fraught with consequence, a fleeting encounter that could bless a life or break a heart, but would ultimately fade like mist, leaving only a legend behind. This connection to the Swan Maiden archetype reveals a fluidity in the Valkyrie's nature, but to grasp their full significance in the Norse spiritual landscape, we must widen our view even further, placing them within a vast and powerful network of female divinity. The Valkyries were not an isolated phenomenon. They were a specialized, highly visible part of a much broader category of supernatural women known as the Disir. Understanding this relationship is like realizing that a special forces soldier is part of a larger national army. The Valkyries were the elite operatives within a comprehensive system of female spiritual power that watched over every aspect of life, from the battlefield to the family hearth. The word Disir is a collective term, a plural that encompasses a wide array of female entities. At their core, the Disir were ancestral spirits, the matriarchs of a family line who, after death, continued to watch over their living descendants. They were the guardians of the clan's luck, fertility, and overall well-being, deeply concerned with the continuation and prosperity of the family unit. Think of them as the spiritual embodiment of a family's collective memory and strength, a benevolent presence invoked for protection, especially during the critical moments of life like childbirth and marriage. They were honored in specific rituals, most notably the Disablot, a sacrificial feast held to secure their favor for the coming year. This connection to fate was not about the grand, cosmic destiny of Ragnarök, but about the intimate, everyday fate of the household, ensuring healthy children, bountiful harvests, and protection from misfortune. So, how does this relate to the terrifying figures on the battlefield? The link becomes clear when we see the Disir not just as gentle guardians, but as multifaceted beings whose influence extended to war. Certain Disir were specifically associated with particular tribes or royal lineages, acting as their supernatural protectors in conflict. In this role, they functioned almost identically to Valkyries, but with a crucial difference in focus. A Valkyrie served Odin's agenda, selecting the best individual warriors from any tribe for his cosmic army. A familial Dis, however, was loyal to her own bloodline. Her concern was the victory and survival of her specific descendants. She might weave spells of protection around them, grant them courage in the fray, or even help steer the course of the battle to ensure their success. In this sense, the Valkyries can be seen as a kind of state-sponsored Disir, their allegiance transferred from a single family to the highest god, Odin, and his project for the entire cosmos. This blending of roles is beautifully illustrated in the literature. The epic poem Ham, this mole famously blurs the lines entirely, asking a poignant question: were they Valkyries or were they Disir? When describing supernatural women influencing a battle, this ambiguity was intentional. It suggests that to a warrior on the ground, the distinction might not have mattered. The female power shaping his fate, whether it was a personal ancestral spirit or one of Odin's choosers, was a manifestation of the same fundamental force. The Disir represented the protective, life-giving side of this force, concerned with creation and continuity. The Valkyries represented its decisive, life-taking side, concerned with honor and cosmic preparation. Together, they formed a complete picture of female divine influence, governing both the beginning and the end of life's journey. This connection places the Valkyries within a deeply rooted tradition of venerating powerful female spirits, a tradition that likely predates the more structured pantheon of gods like Odin and Thor. It suggests that the concept of sacred, fate-weaving women was a foundational pillar of the Norse worldview. The Valkyries were not a later invention, but rather the most dramatic and specialized evolution of this ancient belief. By linking them to the Disir, we see them not as outliers, but as integral components of a complex spiritual ecosystem where the boundaries between a protective grandmother's spirit and a god's battle-hardened agent were wonderfully and powerfully porous. Moving from the mists of myth and poetry into the clear light of history, we find that the Valkyries left their mark not only on the pages of sagas, but also on the physical objects of the Viking Age. Archaeology provides a fascinating, tangible connection to these beings, showing us how everyday Norse people envisioned and venerated these powerful figures. Among the most evocative discoveries are small, intricate figurines, often crafted from silver, bronze, or gold, frequently discovered as prized possessions among grave goods. These weren't grand statues for public display. They were personal amulets, cherished items buried with their owners, likely for protection or as a symbol of hope for a glorious afterlife. The imagery on these figurines is remarkably consistent and deeply revealing. We see them depicted not always in full battle armor, but often in long, elegant dresses, their hair sometimes braided, holding out drinking horns as if in an act of offering or welcome. This directly mirrors their role as the hostesses of Valhalla, the Ölvalua or Ale Valkyries who served the Einherjar. Other figurines show them armed with spears and shields, a clear nod to their battlefield duties. This duality, captured in metal, the nurturing server, and the fierce warrior, perfectly encapsulates the complex nature we've explored, showing that this balance was central to how they were perceived by the people who believed in them. These small personal items speak to individual faith, but for public declarations of belief and power, we must look to the rune stones. These massive standing stones, erected as memorials to the dead, are canvases of Norse mythology, and the Valkyries make several stunning appearances. One of the most compelling examples is the Stora hammer stone from the island of Gotland in Sweden. This stone is covered in intricate panels that seem to tell a story. One widely interpreted scene depicts a man arriving in what appears to be a hall, often thought to be Valhalla. He is greeted by a woman holding a drinking horn. This figure is almost certainly a Valkyrie, welcoming the deceased warrior to his new eternal home. In another panel on the same stone, we see a scene of intense battle, and above it, a figure on horseback riding across what could be the sky, perhaps a literal depiction of a Valkyrie overseeing the conflict below. The Tjengvid image stone, also from Gotland, presents an even more iconic image. A rider on an 8-legged horse, unmistakably the god Odin, is greeted by a female figure offering a horn. This is a powerful visual representation of the direct link between the All-Father and his choosers. The warrior, having been selected, is now presented to Odin himself by the Valkyrie who brought him. Beyond specific depictions, the very symbols found on jewelry and everyday objects whisper of the Valkyrie's presence. Recurring motifs like stylized horses and birds, particularly ravens, can be interpreted as indirect references to these supernatural women. Remember the kenning that described ravens as the horses of the Valkyries. A brooch decorated with ravens might not just be a symbol of Odin, but could also evoke the idea that the Valkyries were near, that their influence was woven into the fabric of life and death. These archaeological finds do something that texts alone cannot. They prove that the Valkyries were not just literary inventions for epic poems, but were integrated into the spiritual and cultural life of the Norse. They were figures of personal devotion, symbols of hope for a heroic death, and central characters in the visual language used to commemorate the departed. They bridge the gap between the grand cosmic narrative of Ragnarök and the intimate human experience of loss and legacy, showing us that the idea of a divine chooser was a comfort and an inspiration carved in stone and worn close to the heart. To truly appreciate how the Norse mind viewed these formidable figures, we must step away from the sagas and into the world of the skalds, the master poets who were the architects of Viking culture. For them, the Valkyries were not just characters in stories, they were fundamental building blocks of language itself, woven into the very fabric of how they described the world, especially the world of war. They achieved this through a unique and sophisticated artistic tool, the kenning. A kenning is a type of metaphorical compound phrase, a poetic riddle where you describe something not by its name, but by what it does or what it's associated with. Think of it as a two-part puzzle. The sea isn't just the sea, it's the whale road. A ship isn't a ship, it's the steed of the waves. This practice elevated everyday language into a complex and beautiful art form, and the Valkyries were a favorite, powerful ingredient in these linguistic creations. When a skald wanted to talk about a shield, he wouldn't use the plain word. Instead, he might call it Hilda's snowshoe. Now, who is Hilda? We know her as a Valkyrie whose name literally means battle. So, what is the poet telling us? A snowshoe is what allows you to travel across a treacherous, soft surface without sinking. By calling a shield Hilda's snowshoe, the skald is painting a vivid picture of the Valkyrie gliding over the battlefield, a landscape as perilous and deep as a snowfield untouched by the chaos below, her shield allowing her to move with purpose and grace. Similarly, a sword might be referred to as Gondol's fire. Gondol, another Valkyrie whose name suggests a wand wielder or enchanter, is associated with the magical, decisive power of battle. The fire of her sword is not just its metallic gleam, but the fierce, destructive energy it unleashes. These kennings do more than just rename objects, they infuse them with the supernatural power and presence of the Valkyrie. transforming a warrior's gear into an extension of divine will. This metaphorical language becomes even more potent when applied to the battle itself. A poet wouldn't simply say, "A fierce battle raged." He would describe it as Gondal's storm or Skurgul's din. Imagine the power in that. A storm is an uncontrollable force of nature, chaotic, violent, and decisive. To call a battle Gondal's storm is to say that the Valkyrie is not just observing the conflict, she is the conflict. She is the tempest of clashing steel and dying men. Similarly, Skurgul's din, Skurgul meaning shaker, evokes the overwhelming, ear-splitting noise of combat, the very sound that makes the earth tremble. These kennings remove human agency altogether. The battle is not fought by men, but is rather a phenomenon conjured and unleashed by the Valkyrie. She is the animating spirit of the violence. The most profound and chilling kennings, however, relate to the warrior's death. As we've heard, ravens and wolves were called the horses of the Valkyries. But a skald could be even more direct. Death in battle could be described as receiving a Gondal's invitation or being chosen by Hilda. This transforms the moment of death from a random, tragic event into a deliberate, almost ceremonial selection. To die is to accept an invitation to a higher purpose. It frames the warrior's end not as a failure, but as the ultimate success, the moment his valor is recognized by a divine authority. This use of kenning was a powerful piece of psychological and cultural engineering. It encouraged bravery by making death in combat the most desirable outcome, a fate preordained and blessed by supernatural beings. This pervasive use in poetry demonstrates that the concept of the Valkyrie was deeply embedded in the Norse psyche. They weren't niche mythological figures, they were an essential part of the cultural vocabulary for understanding and talking about warfare, honor, and fate. For a Viking audience listening to a skald recite an epic, these kennings were instantly understood. They created a shared symbolic universe where every shield, every sword, every battle cry, and every death was connected to the grand cosmic drama overseen by Odin and his choosers. The skalds, through their art, reinforced the idea that the battlefield was a sacred space where the human and divine intimately interacted, and that the Valkyries were the constant, active link between the two. The formidable figures we have come to know, these arbiters of fate who weave the outcomes of battles and serve the Einherjar, did not spring into the Norse imagination fully formed as the majestic, armored maidens of popular legend. Their image underwent a profound transformation over centuries, evolving from terrifying, almost demonic spirits of slaughter into the more complex, romantic heroines we encounter in the great sagas. This evolution reflects a significant shift in the culture that created them, moving from an older, more starkly fatalistic world view to one that began to explore the intricate dramas of the human heart. In the earliest layers of Norse poetry, particularly the poems of the poetic Edda that preserve some of the most ancient traditions, the Valkyries are presented with a raw, primal power that is far removed from later romanticism. Here, they are less individualized characters and more like elemental forces, personifications of battle's chaos and carnage. Their primary function is not to reward heroism with a cushy afterlife, but to fulfill Odin's insatiable need for warriors with ruthless efficiency. They are often described in collective terms, a legion of ominous figures whose very presence signifies a bloodbath. The emphasis is on their role as inciters of the very berserker frenzy we discussed, as weavers of the grisly tapestry of war in the Daradhaljoth. In these older sources, they are closely associated with ravens and wolves, not as metaphors but as their literal companions on the field. They are choosers, yes, but the choosing feels less like an honor bestowed and more like a grim harvest reaped. There is little room for their personality or emotion. They are extensions of Odin's will, terrifying and inevitable instruments of a cosmic agenda. The turning point in this evolution is found in the forges of story itself, as the oral traditions of the Vikings were gradually written down in the great prose sagas of the 13th century and beyond. It is in these narratives, particularly the Völsunga saga, that we witness the Valkyrie becoming humanized. No longer just a faceless spirit, she is given a name, a history, and most importantly, a heart. The story of Brynhilda is the quintessential example of this shift. She is every bit the powerful, divine agent of the older myths, a shield maiden of Odin who disobeys him and is punished. But the saga does not leave her as a mere plot device. It delves into her psychology. We see her pride, her sense of honor, her capacity for deep, passionate love, and a devastating, world-shattering rage when that love is betrayed. Her tragedy is not just a function of fate, it is driven by very human emotions, jealousy, shame, and a broken heart. In Brynhilda, the Valkyrie steps down from the abstract plane of cosmic forces and becomes a character whose choices and sufferings we can understand and empathize with. This transformation from a force of nature to a tragic heroine reflects a cultural movement towards more complex, character-driven storytelling, where the internal world of individuals became as compelling as the external clash of armies and gods. This process of romanticization only intensified as the Viking Age receded into history and the myths were filtered through later literary and artistic movements. By the time of the Romantic era in the 19th century, European artists and composers, most famously Richard Wagner in his monumental opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen, recast the Valkyries in a mold that would dominate the modern imagination. Wagner's Valkyries, with their iconic Ride of the Valkyries music, are powerful, stirring figures, but they are also deeply romanticized. The darker, more sinister edges are softened. Their connection to carnage and their role as inciters of frenzied violence is downplayed in favor of their majesty and their tragic, lovelorn aspects. Brynhilda becomes the ultimate romantic heroine, her story focused almost entirely on her love for Siegfried, the German counterpart to Sigurd. This interpretation, while incredibly influential, simplifies the complex Norse original, creating a figure that is more palatable and dramatically focused for a new audience, but one that has lost some of the raw, fearsome power of her ancient origins. Today, the Valkyrie exists in a fascinating space, a composite of all these layers. In popular culture, from fantasy novels to blockbuster films and video games, we see the romantic, heroic Valkyrie most prominently. She is the strong, independent warrior woman, a symbol of female power and agency. Yet echoes of the older, more ominous figure remain, often in darker, more mythologically grounded stories that seek to reclaim her primal nature. This evolution is not a corruption of the original myth but a testament to its enduring power. The figure of the Valkyrie is so potent and versatile that she can accommodate different interpretations across time, serving as a mirror to the values and concerns of each era that rediscovered her. From a demonic chooser on a blood-stained field to a tragic lover on a fiery rock, and finally to a modern icon of strength, her journey is as compelling as any saga, revealing not just a change in a mythological character, but the evolving way we understand power, fate, and the human heart. But this evolution of the Valkyrie, from a fearsome agent of fate to a tragic heroine of saga, was not the final chapter in their story. A new and monumental transformation awaited in the 19th century, one that would forever cement their image in the global imagination, though in a form the Vikings themselves might scarcely recognize. This seismic shift came from the mind of a single, controversial German composer, Richard Wagner. His epic four-part opera cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen, or The Ring of the Nibelung, did not just interpret Norse myth, it reinvented it for a modern era, and in doing so, created the version of the Valkyries that most people picture today. Wagner was a mythmaker on a grand scale, drawing from the ancient sources like the Völsunga saga, but filtering them through his own artistic vision and the soaring, emotional power of Romanticism. In his hands, the complex and often grim figures of the old poems were reshaped into something grander, more theatrical, and intensely dramatic. Wagner's most iconic contribution is without a doubt the piece of music known as the Ride of the Valkyries. Even if you have never seen an opera, you have almost certainly heard this thunderous, exhilarating theme. It begins with a galloping rhythm in the strings, evoking the powerful stride of celestial steeds before exploding into the main melody, a bold, brassy call to arms that is simultaneously majestic and wildly exciting. This music doesn't just accompany the Valkyries, it is them. It captures the raw energy of their flight, the thrill of the hunt, and the sheer, overwhelming power of their divine purpose. Wagner's genius was in giving these beings a sound that felt as epic as their mythic role, a sound that conveys motion, might, and sisterhood all at once. This musical depiction was so effective that it completely detached from the opera itself, becoming a universal shorthand for impending action, heroic arrival, or unstoppable force, used in countless films, cartoons, and advertisements, often with little connection to its original context. Visually, Wagner's staging was equally influential. He presented the Valkyries not as individual figures with distinct personalities like Brynhilde, but as a united squadron of 8 sisters, the Valkyrian, led by their father, Wotan, the German name for Odin. They were costumed in classic romantic opera style, wearing helmets adorned with wings, carrying spears and shields, and clad in armor that suggested both ancient warrior and theatrical spectacle. The stage direction called for them to appear on a rocky peak, calling out to each other with their famous cry of Hojatoho as they gathered the souls of heroes. This image, the sisterhood of armored maidens assembled on a mountaintop, became the definitive visual template. It emphasized their unity and their collective mission, creating a powerful, memorable stage picture that was far easier to grasp and reproduce than the more varied and abstract descriptions found in the Eddas. However, this powerful and popular depiction came with a significant trade-off. In streamlining the Valkyries for the opera stage, Wagner inevitably simplified their nature, smoothing over their darker, more ambiguous edges. The terrifying, fate-weaving creatures of the Darathaljoth, who loom grisly tapestries from human intestines, are entirely absent. So too is their intimate connection to the wolf and the raven, the visceral reality of the scavenger's feast. The complex, often dangerous magic of Seder is downplayed in favor of a more straightforward, heroic narrative, most notably the profound duality of their character. The fierce battlefield chooser who becomes the gracious server in Valhalla is largely lost. In Wagner's Ring, they are primarily Odin's emissaries, his divine couriers. Their role as the nurturing Ölvolur, the ale servers who comfort the Einherjar, is not part of their story. Wagner's Valkyries are grand, exciting, and stirring, but they are also a romanticized, sanitized version, stripped of the primal, unsettling power that made them such compelling figures in the original myths. The impact of this Wagnerian interpretation cannot be overstated. For over a century, it was the primary lens through which the Western world encountered Norse mythology. His operas were cultural events, and the imagery from his productions, including illustrations and posters, spread his version of the Valkyries far and wide. When illustrators, novelists, and later filmmakers wanted to depict a Valkyrie, they turned not to the poetic Edda but to Wagner's stage. The winged helmet, in particular, became an indispensable part of the costume, despite having a very weak basis in the original sources. This has led to the fascinating situation we have today, where the most popular and recognizable image of a Valkyrie is a 19th century operatic invention. This Wagnerian filter is so dominant that it often colors even modern, more authentic retellings of the myths, proving the enduring power of a truly captivating artistic vision, even when it takes substantial liberties with its source material. This enduring power, solidified by Wagner's operatic vision, has ensured that the Valkyries have galloped seamlessly from the stages of the 19th century onto the screens of the 21st. In our modern pop culture landscape, these mythological figures have found a vibrant new afterlife, their core concept proving endlessly adaptable for comics, blockbuster films, and immersive video games. Perhaps the most globally recognizable version today is not from an ancient saga, but from the pages of Marvel Comics and the spectacle of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The character of Valkyrie, also known as Brunhilde, first appeared in the 1970s and has been reimagined for a modern audience, most prominently in films like Thor, Ragnarök, and Avengers Endgame. The Marvel interpretation smartly retains several key mythological elements. She is a fierce Asgardian warrior, a member of an elite sisterhood, and her primary duty is indeed to carry the souls of worthy heroes to Valhalla, a concept explicitly named in the films. Her iconic Pegasus, Aragorn, serves as a clear, fantastical stand-in for the ethereal steeds of myth. However, the Marvel version makes significant adaptations to fit the superhero genre and contemporary sensibilities. The Valkyrja are portrayed as an elite royal guard who are nearly wiped out in a battle against Hela, a change that creates a compelling backstory of loss and resilience for the character. This Brunhilde is a gritty, hard-drinking scrapper trying to forget her past, a character archetype that resonates more with a modern anti-hero than a remote divine agent. Her role as a chooser of the slain is downplayed in favor of her skills as a frontline combatant and leader. This simplification is a practical necessity for an action-driven narrative. It's far easier to show a character fighting alongside heroes than to depict the abstract, spiritual process of soul selection. Furthermore, the MCU's casting of Tessa Thompson brought a new layer of diversity and charismatic swagger to the role, emphasizing individuality and personal journey over the collective, impersonal function of the mythical Valkyries. This portrayal makes the ancient figure relatable, transforming her from a personification of fate into a flawed, heroic teammate. The world of video games provides an even more interactive canvas for exploring the Valkyries, allowing players to not just observe but to literally confront these legendary beings. The 2018 soft reboot of God of War offers one of the most respectful and creatively expanded interpretations. Here, the Valkyries are not mere enemies but tragic figures central to the game's lore. Corrupted by a spell from Odin himself, they have been imprisoned in hidden chambers throughout the realms, their minds broken and their forms twisted into monstrous, frenzied bosses. The player, as Kratos, undertakes the quest to free them from their torment. This narrative brilliantly captures the Valkyries' terrifying power. Each one is a supremely challenging fight, a test of the player's skill that mirrors the ultimate test of a warrior's worth. Their design blends the traditional armored maiden with a terrifying, almost insectoid ferocity, visually representing their corrupted state. By making the Valkyries both formidable adversaries and tragic victims needing liberation, the game delves into the darker aspects of Odin's character from the myths, exploring themes of control and abuse of power, while still honoring the Valkyries' core identity as Odin's instruments. In stark contrast, a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla aims for a different kind of authenticity, grounding its depiction in a more historical, albeit still fictional, setting. The Valkyries appear within the game's Norse mythology-inspired dream sequences, known as the Asgard and Jotunheim arcs. Their portrayal is more direct, serving as graceful, powerful figures who guide the protagonist Eva through these mythical realms. They are depicted as the hostesses of Valhalla, serving mead to the Einherjar, a role pulled straight from the ancient texts. While God of War explores the pathos and corruption of these beings, Assassin's Creed Valhalla focuses on their ceremonial and honorable aspects, presenting them as an integral part of the idealized Viking afterlife that Eva explores. This approach serves to educate players about the mythological framework in a more straightforward manner, embedding the Valkyries within the cultural and religious beliefs of the game's world. Beyond these major titles, the influence of the Valkyrie archetype is widespread. They appear as powerful character classes in role-playing games like the Final Fantasy series and World of Warcraft, where the name Valkyrie is synonymous with a powerful female warrior who can blend melee combat with protective or light-based magic. This adaptation simplifies the mythology into a set of gameplay mechanics, but it keeps the core idea of a strong, martial woman connected to themes of death and honor alive in the gaming lexicon. These varied portrayals across media demonstrate the incredible flexibility of the Valkyrie concept. Modern storytellers are not simply retelling the old stories, they are mining them for core themes: female power, the interface between life and death, honor in combat, and tragic destiny, and recontextualizing those themes for new audiences. Whether she is a superhero finding a new family, a corrupted queen needing redemption, or a symbolic guide to a mythological world, the Valkyrie continues to be a powerful vessel for exploring what it means to face death with courage and to find meaning in the struggle itself. Now, given everything we've explored about their supernatural nature, it's crucial to clear up a point of confusion that arises frequently: the difference between a Valkyrie and a shield maiden. While popular media often uses these terms interchangeably, in the original Norse context, they represent two fundamentally different ideas, one divine, the other human. A Valkyrie, as we've seen, is a supernatural being, a daughter of a god or a powerful spirit, an entity whose role is to serve Odin's cosmic agenda on the ethereal plane of fate and the afterlife. A shield maiden, on the other hand, was a human woman who chose to take up arms and fight. The term refers to the historical or legendary figures who stepped outside traditional gender roles to become warriors, leaders, and explorers in their own right. Think of it this way: the Valkyrie is the divine archetype, the ultimate celestial ideal of the warrior woman. The shield maiden is the mortal who strives to embody that ideal here on Earth. Archaeological evidence and sagas like the Saga of the Volsungs or the Saga of Herve suggest that while uncommon, there were indeed women in Norse society who fought. The chronicles of the Byzantine Empire even mention Norse women warriors among the Varangian guards. These shield maidens would have trained, fought in battles, and sought glory and honor just like their male counterparts. They were inspired by the legends of powerful female figures, and the Valkyries, with their martial prowess and autonomy, would have been the highest possible model to aspire to. A human shield maiden might hope that her courage would catch the eye of a Valkyrie, earning her a place in Valhalla, but she herself was not a Valkyrie. The distinction lies in their essential nature and scope of power. A shield maiden, no matter how skilled, was subject to the same mortal constraints as any warrior. She could be wounded, she would age, and she would eventually die, with her fate thereafter decided by the same divine choosers she admired. Her influence was limited to the human world, her community, her battles, her lifespan. A Valkyrie's power, in contrast, was cosmic. She was immortal, could shapeshift, wielded powerful magic, and played a direct role in the fate of the universe leading to Ragnarök. She didn't just fight in battles, she orchestrated their outcomes and selected the slain from them. So, while a legendary shield maiden like the fierce Lagertha from the sagas might be described as having the heart of a Valkyrie for her bravery, she remains a celebrated human heroine, whereas the Valkyrie is a goddess of war. Conflating the two is like confusing a particularly devout priest with an angel. One is a human serving a higher power, the other is a manifestation of that power itself. Understanding this separation helps us appreciate both concepts more fully. The shield maiden as a testament to human potential and the Valkyrie as a profound mythological force. To truly understand the Valkyrie's place in the grand design of the cosmos, we must introduce another set of formidable female figures, the ones who hold the ultimate authority over destiny itself, the Norns. While the Valkyries are the active agents on the battlefield, Their power to choose is not random or independent. It is an execution of a preordained plan, a single thread pulled from a much vaster and more intricate tapestry. That tapestry is woven by the Norns, the trio of cosmic beings who govern the fate of all existence, from the mightiest god in Asgard to the smallest creature in Midgard. Picture the Valkyries as elite field operatives, carrying out a critical mission with precision and discretion. The Norns, in this analogy, are the master strategists in a command center far from the front lines, the ones who drafted the mission parameters before the first sword was ever drawn. They work on a scale that is almost incomprehensible, dealing with the birth and death of worlds. Their domain is a place of profound stillness and power, the Well of Urther, which translates to the Well of Fate or Well of Destiny, situated at the very roots of the world tree, Yggdrasil. Here, at the axis of the cosmos, the three sisters perform their eternal task. Their names reveal the scope of their work. The first is Urther, whose name means fate or that which has become. She represents the past, the part of the tapestry that is already woven, the unchangeable events that have led to the present moment. The second is Verthandi, meaning present or that which is becoming. She spins the thread as it is right now, actively shaping the unfolding reality of the current instant. The third, and often the most feared, is Skuld, whose name means future or that which should become. She carries a shears, and she is responsible for cutting the thread of life when its appointed time has come, determining the length and ultimate end of every being's destiny. Together, they are past, present, and future incarnate, the weavers of the Orlug, the primal law or destiny that even the gods must obey. Their weaving is not of wool or silk, but of the very substance of reality. They draw water from the well, which is mingled with sacred clay, and from this they spin the threads of fate. As they weave, their work dictates the course of events for everyone and everything. A king's rise, a harvest's failure, a child's first breath, a star's eventual fade, all are patterns in their grand design. This makes their power absolute. Unlike the Greek fates, who are often portrayed as inflexible and merciless, the Norns are a more complex force. They are not necessarily malevolent, but they are utterly impartial. They do not concern themselves with morality or justice in a human sense. They simply ensure that the cosmic tapestry unfolds according to its own inherent, inscrutable logic. Odin himself, the All-Father, fears them and seeks their wisdom, for not even he can alter what they have decreed. He can only prepare for it. This is where the crucial distinction and connection with the Valkyries becomes clear. The Norns operate on the macro level, setting the grand, unchangeable narrative. They might decree that a great battle will occur on a certain day and that a certain number of warriors will die. This is the broad, predetermined outcome. The Valkyries, however, operate on the micro level. They are the specialists tasked with implementing a specific, critical part of that narrative. It is their job to navigate the chaos of that preordained battle and ensure that the decree of the Norns is fulfilled with exacting precision. While the Norns have determined that a hero will fall, the Valkyrie uses her satyr and her discerning eye to ensure how and when he falls, selecting his spirit at the moment that best serves Odin's needs and honors the warrior's own thread of destiny. The Valkyrie is not weaving the entire tapestry. She is expertly embroidering a single, vital section of it, the section concerning heroic death and the recruitment for Ragnarök. Think of the Norns as the architects who design a magnificent cathedral, specifying its overall dimensions, its structural integrity, and its ultimate purpose. The Valkyries are the master stonemasons who take the blueprints and, with incredible skill, lay each individual stone, ensuring that every block is perfectly placed to bring the architect's vision to life. One creates the grand plan, the other executes a vital component of that plan. The Valkyrie's power to choose is therefore not a contradiction of fate, but its ultimate expression. She is the martial agent of the Norns, the means by which their cosmic will is made manifest in the visceral, bloody reality of the battlefield. Her discernment is a tool of destiny itself, ensuring that the threads of the most courageous lives are cut not randomly, but are instead gathered and woven into the even grander design of the god's final stand. While the powerful image of the Valkyrie is most vividly preserved in the Norse sources from Scandinavia, the archetype of the supernatural battlewoman was not confined to the fjords and forests of the north. This formidable figure was a shared inheritance across the various tribes and cultures of the Germanic world, appearing under different names but carrying the same aura of awe and terror. When we trace these threads through the wider tapestry of Germanic lore, we see a fascinating pattern of variation where the core concept adapts to local beliefs, sometimes emphasizing darker, more sinister aspects that were only hinted at in the later Norse sagas. Our journey first takes us to the world of the Anglo-Saxons in England, where the Old English word for a Valkyrie was valkyrja. The linguistic connection is unmistakable. Just like the Old Norse valkyrja, it is a compound of val, meaning the slain on the battlefield, and syrj, which relates to choosing. So a valkyrja was etymologically the same chooser of the slain. However, the surviving references to these beings in Anglo-Saxon texts paint a distinctly grimmer picture than their Norse counterparts. Here, the valkyrja is less a graceful hostess of Valhalla and more closely associated with witchcraft, death, and calamity. They are mentioned alongside monsters and sorcerers, depicted as malevolent spirits who revel in slaughter. In one charm, they are even invoked as a source of infection, a far cry from the noble figures serving mead in Odin's hall. This suggests that in the Anglo-Saxon worldview, the concept retained a much older, more primal character. These were terrifying spectral women who presided over the horrors of war, perhaps closer to the Morrigan of Celtic mythology than to the romanticized Brynhilde. Their connection to magic or witchcraft was pronounced, aligning them with Seda but framing it as a darker, more destructive art. This portrayal highlights how the same archetype could evolve differently. In Scandinavia, the mythos softened and humanized the Valkyrie, while in England, the figure remained a stark embodiment of battle's grim fate. Moving to the continent, we find the German incarnation, the valkyrja. Thanks primarily to Richard Wagner's monumental operas, this is the name most familiar to a global audience. The German form is a direct cognate, showing the common linguistic and mythological roots of the Germanic peoples. However, the pre-Wagnerian German traditions, preserved in fragments and place names, also hint at a complex figure. The valkyrja was understood as a wild, forest-dwelling spirit, sometimes connected to the tumultuous, primal forces of nature that featured so prominently in German folklore. She was a being of the untamed woods and the misty mountains, a spectral rider who could be both a harbinger of doom and a bestower of victory. This connection to the wild places reinforces the idea of the Valkyrie as a liminal being, existing on the boundaries between the human world and the supernatural realm. While the Norse sources strongly tie them to Odin, the continental traditions sometimes present them with a degree of autonomy as elemental forces in their own right. The widespread nature of this archetype, from the British Isles to the heart of Europe, proves that the concept of a divine or semi-divine woman who controlled the fates of warriors was a fundamental pillar of the early Germanic spiritual imagination, a shared response to the universal experience of war and its consequences. These regional variations are not contradictions but rather different facets of the same profound idea. They demonstrate how a core mythological concept bends and shifts to reflect the specific anxieties, values, and historical experiences of a culture. The Anglo-Saxon valkyrja, with her associations with sorcery and pestilence, might reflect a society grappling with the traumas of invasion and settlement. The German valkyrja, linked to the wild forest, speaks to a deep-seated reverence for and fear of the untamed natural world. And the Norse valkyrja, with her developed role in the cosmic drama of Ragnarök and her complex human-like emotions, shows a mythology that had evolved into a rich, narrative-driven system. Together, they show us that the fear and fascination with the power that decides a warrior's death was a ghost that haunted the battlefields of all the Germanic peoples, a spectral presence known by many names but recognized by all who lived and died by the sword. Beyond their specific duties in myth and their historical evolution, the figures of the Valkyries resonate on a much deeper, more universal level, tapping into what the psychologist Carl Jung would call a powerful archetype. An archetype is a primordial image, a fundamental pattern of human experience that exists in our collective unconscious, and the Valkyrie embodies one of the most compelling of these patterns, the image of the empowered feminine within a traditionally masculine domain. They are not merely characters in a story, they are symbolic representations of female agency, authority, and the complex integration of traits that society often tries to keep separate. At their core, they represent the formidable idea of a woman holding absolute power in the sphere of war, the most brutally masculine of all human endeavors. In a world where the battlefield was the ultimate proving ground for men, where honor was won and lost by the sword, the Valkyries stand as divine overseers. They are the ultimate judges, the ones for whom the warriors ultimately perform. This reverses the expected power dynamic completely. The male warrior, for all his strength and courage, is ultimately subject to the discernment and choice of a female figure. His fate, his eternal glory, rests in her hands. This is a profound symbol of female authority, suggesting that true power is not about physical might alone, but about judgment, wisdom, and the sovereignty to decide outcomes. This archetype also powerfully challenges the simplistic dichotomy between the fierce and the nurturing. The Valkyrie seamlessly integrates what are often seen as opposing qualities. On the battlefield, she is a terrifying vision of martial might, a being of storm and iron who can incite berserker rage and weave the bloody outcome of conflicts. Yet in Valhalla, she transforms into a gracious hostess, the Valkyrie who serves mead and offers comfort to the hero she has chosen. She is both the bringer of death and the bestower of solace. This duality makes her an incredibly complete and balanced symbol. She is not a one-dimensional warrior woman who has simply adopted masculine traits. She possesses a full spectrum of power that encompasses both destruction and creation, both the ruthless execution of duty and the compassionate care for the honored dead. She represents the idea that true strength is not the absence of nurturing, and that compassion is not a weakness that precludes ferocity. This integrated wholeness is a big part of her enduring appeal, offering a model of empowerment that does not require sacrificing one aspect of the self for another. In a modern context, this archetype provides a powerful mythological foundation for re-evaluating leadership and strength. The Valkyrie model suggests that the most effective form of power might be one that can access both decisive action and empathetic understanding. A leader who can be both a skirgle, a shaker who makes tough, disruptive decisions when necessary, and an ervalure, a nourisher who supports and sustains their community, embodies a more resilient and adaptable form of authority. This resonates strongly with contemporary discussions about leadership styles, where qualities like emotional intelligence, collaboration, and empathy are increasingly valued alongside determination and strategic thinking. The Valkyrie, in her ancient duality, prefigures this modern ideal, showing that the capacity for fierce protection and gentle nurturing are not just compatible, but are two sides of the same coin of genuine strength. Furthermore, the Valkyrie archetype speaks to the concept of personal agency in the face of fate. While they are instruments of a larger cosmic plan, figures like Brynhilde demonstrate immense personal will. Her decision to disobey Odin, though it leads to her downfall, is an act of incredible autonomy. She prioritizes her own sense of justice over blind obedience to divine authority. Her subsequent story, for all its tragedy, is driven by her own choices, her rage, her love, and her final decision to join Sigurd in death. This transforms the Valkyrie from a passive instrument of fate into an active shaper of her own destiny, even within the constraints of a predetermined system. This aspect of the archetype is deeply empowering, representing the struggle for self-determination and the courage to make choices based on personal conviction, regardless of the consequences. It's a reminder that empowerment is not just about having power over external circumstances or other people, but about having sovereignty over one's own choices and actions. The enduring presence of the Valkyrie in modern media, from superhero films to video games, is a testament to the ongoing vitality of this archetype. Each new interpretation, whether it's Marvel's hard-drinking Brunhilde or God of War's tormented queens, is a way for our culture to continue a conversation about female power, agency, and the integration of different kinds of strength. They allow us to explore these themes through a lens that feels epic and distanced, yet personally resonant. The Valkyrie continues to be a vessel for our collective aspirations and anxieties about power, serving as a mythical mirror reflecting our evolving understanding of what it means to be strong, to choose, and to be whole. She is far more than a relic of Norse mythology. She is a timeless symbol whose message of integrated power and fierce agency remains as relevant today as it was over 1,000 years ago on a misty Scandinavian battlefield. From the blood-soaked fields of ancient Scandinavia to the cosmic halls of Valhalla, our journey through the world of the Valkyries reveals them as some of the most complex and compelling figures in all of mythology. We have seen that they defy simple categorization. They were not merely angels of death but discerning choosers of the slain, divine talent scouts whose selection was the highest honor a warrior could achieve. They were not only fierce riders on ethereal steeds but also gracious hostesses, the ale servers who offered comfort and camaraderie to the heroes they had gathered. Their power extended beyond the spear and shield into the very fabric of reality itself, as master weavers of fate who used potent Seder magic to shape the outcomes of battles on a gruesome, supernatural loom. And in the tragic saga of Brynhilde, we witnessed their profound humanity, their capacity for love, defiance, and heartbreak, elevating them from archetypes into unforgettable characters whose stories resonate across the centuries. Their own evolution is a saga in itself. They began as fearsome, almost demonic spirits of carnage, closely allied with wolves and ravens, whose primary function was to satisfy Odin's grim need for an army. Over time, through the artistry of poets and saga writers, they were humanized, given names, emotions, and intricate stories that explored the tensions between duty and desire. This journey continued into the modern era, where they were transformed once more by artists like Wagner into the iconic, stirring figures of opera, and later reimagined for new generations in the pages of comics and on the screens of blockbuster films and video games. Through it all, the core archetype of the powerful, autonomous woman who holds authority over life, death, and destiny has remained potent, a testament to the enduring need for such symbols. Ultimately, the Valkyries are a mirror reflecting our own changing understanding of power, fate, and the human spirit. They represent the perfect integration of forces we often see as opposites, the ferocity of war and the solace of peace, the impartial hand of destiny and the passionate will of the individual. They remind us that true strength lies not in one-dimensional might, but in the balance of judgment and compassion, of action and nurturance. Their legend invites us to consider the choices we make, the honors we value, and the legacies we wish to leave behind. Now we turn the final page over to you. With such a rich and multifaceted mythology, everyone finds a different aspect that captures their imagination. Which part of the Valkyrie story resonates most deeply with you? Is it their terrifying power as weavers of fate on the battlefield, their serene grace as hostesses in the golden light of Valhalla, or the heartbreaking human drama of a figure like Brynhilde? Perhaps it is their evolution from ancient spirits to modern icons that you find most fascinating. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear which of these formidable women has left the strongest mark on you. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Norse mythology, please subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the legends, gods, and monsters that have shaped our world. Until next time, may your own choices be wise and your courage unwavering.